Hey there, everyone. This is a quick message to let you know I had a classic Mercury retrograde situation when I recorded this week's podcast. I didn't have my usual fancy podcasting microphone selected properly, and so the sound is a little different from what you are used to. That said, it should be clear enough for you to get all the juicy insights about the best and worst aspects for the month of August. So I hope you enjoy the show, and I will endeavor to be more organized with that microphone next week. Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hey there, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Kelly's Astrology podcast. We are just about to start a new month, August. And so what I thought I'd share about in today's episode is my pick for the best and the worst aspect in the month of August. And what is interesting about the aspects this August is that we actually have two classical aspects of kind of ease and hardship. So we have one of the classically best aspects happening this August, and we have an aspect that is considered one of the more challenging combinations also happening this August. And so we've got one aspect that will definitely indicate some frustration, maybe delays, the need to reassess and consolidate. And we have another aspect that is really juicy and joyful and that supports togetherness as well as depth of connection. And so what that means I'm going to be talking about, of course, is the Mars in Libra opposite Saturn in Aries aspect. And I'll be talking about the Venus conjunct Jupiter in Cancer aspect. So before we dive into that, I want to let you know about my student summer workshop happening this August in Orangeville, Ontario. If you're studying astrology online with me and you would like a chance to connect, learn, and grow in person, I hope you'll join us for a fun and informative weekend together. All the details are on the website, kellysastrology.com, so I'll share that link in the show notes below. So let's get into this sort of best and worst aspects for August. Now, this is something that I actually share inside my private membership each month. And what I typically do is use primarily traditional astrology criteria, not always, but primarily. And that's where we're factoring in things like maybe sect or planetary condition, looking at benefic and malefic qualities of planets. And we use all of that traditional criteria to sort of identify what I described very simply as like best and worst. But of course, it's so much more than that. It's an aspect that might be really supportive or encouraging or generative in some capacity. And that tends to be an aspect that is going to be leaning towards the best criteria. And then we have an aspect, or I look for an aspect that looks like it's going to be more challenging or complex or maybe limiting or have qualities of delay in it. And that's going to be an aspect that looks like, perhaps quote unquote, one of the worst aspects for the month ahead. And as astrologers, it's often our job to sort of look at the planetary combinations and configurations and really explore what they will look and feel like in a person's chart and in a person's life. And so when we're looking at aspects for the month ahead, we're sort of taking those similar theories and lines of thinking and applying it to the quality of time that we're all living through. And so the starting place for all of this is that sort of technical astrology theory about which planetary combinations look the most helpful or the most supportive or the most conducive to effective, successful outcomes and actions. And then we're also looking at that technical astrology theory at the kind of aspects that might look the most perplexing or frustrating or confusing. And, we can look at that in a person's birth chart. We can look at that over the course of a calendar year. And for our intents and purposes here today, I've done this for the month of August. And I did mention this is something that I share each month inside my private astrology membership. So there is a bunch of info that I share exclusively for members each month, basically week ahead forecasts, insights for every aspect that's happening over the course of the month. And I include this one section about looking at the best and worst for the month ahead so that everybody inside the membership has a sense of where that aspect and time period for maybe growth or opportunity or insight might lie, and where in the month looks, the most challenging few days. And if that info is of interest to you, you are welcome to join us inside the private astrology membership. As always, details for that are on the website. And of course, I will include this link in the show notes as well. Okay, so looking at the best and worst for August and considering it chronologically, the first aspect of note is the more challenging aspect, and that is Mars opposite Saturn. So here we have an aspect that combines both of what is known as the malefic planets, Mars and Saturn. And don't kind of hear that malefic word and think bad. A better word from a descriptive perspective is to hear malefic and think extreme. And one of the defining criteria of a malefic planet, which is Mars or Saturn, is that they tend to take things to extremes. Now, they can take things to extremes in really productive, constructive ways, and then they can take things to extremes that are really frustrating and really annoying. And unfortunately, we're more likely to get the challenging or problematic side of Mars Saturn under this aspect. So the Mars opposite Saturn aspect is on Friday, August 8th. It might be, early the next morning, depending on where you are. So kind of, we might say later in the day of the 8th or early in the morning of the 9th, depending on where you are. Mars has come to 1 degree of Libra and it's opposing Saturn at 1 degree of Aries. And so one of the ways we get into understanding aspects is we do look at the kind of aspect. So this is an opposition which does have more tension and more pressure around making choices in it. But we also look at the condition of the planets according to the sign that they're in. And so Saturn is currently in Aries, the sign of its fall, and we have Mars in Libra, the sign of its detriment. And so neither Mars nor Saturn is in great sign-based condition here. In fact, they're in places where they are individually a little frustrated, maybe more irritated or annoyed than normal, and neither planet has access to their preferred resources. And, certainly Saturn in fall is not necessarily feeling confident about its skills or its qualities. And so we do get the more difficult expression of Mars Saturn coming forward around the 8th. And what we're looking at here are qualities of delay, frustration, maybe even things being denied or put off. What I think about when Mars and Saturn come together in this type of aspect is this sort of push-pull feeling between the urgency and the impatience of Mars wanting to get things done quickly or get things done now versus the more slow, methodical version of Saturn, which typically wants to do research and take time and plan for things. The funny thing is that because Saturn is currently in Aries, which is a sign ruled by Mars, Saturn is not operating in its typical grounded way. In fact, Saturn has a quality of impatience to it that is very unusual for Saturn. And conversely, Mars is in a sign, Libra, which is ruled by Venus, where Mars is more deliberative or indecisive or more considerate than it might typically be, if left to its own devices. And so Mars and Saturn are both kind of playing roles that are out of character for them. And then they're trying to negotiate from these places. So it certainly feels very topsy-turvy for Mars and Saturn. And so we want to think about this idea of frustration in terms of timing not working out. And that might mean missing something because it's not happening on a timeline that works for you. It might mean not being able to agree to something because you don't have the energy or the capacity for it. Whenever we get oppositions involving Saturn, I think a lot about the saying no piece. No, I'm not going to be able to do that. I don't have capacity for it. That structure isn't going to work for me. That timeline, I can't make work. There can be a lot of very practical reasons that we might be having to say no. when we're getting into that kind of really clear, grounded, expressive place of being aware of our limits and finding ways to communicate them to others, we're actually using the wisdom side of Saturn, to good effect. But since Mars loves that immediate gratification, it might mean we're having to draw on that wisdom or that mature side of ourselves to say, yeah, I really would like to do that, but it's just going to be a stretch too much right now. One thought that occurred to me when I was thinking about this aspect earlier today is, those meetings or encounters you have where you know you have to go, but you really don't want to. And then you do go because you know it's the right thing to do, or you've said you will, or you have to because your boss said, for instance. So you show up to this thing that you don't really want to be at. And then there's an interaction or a discussion, or maybe even a decision is made, and you kind of leave feeling dissatisfied or disappointed. And you know that everyone else that was in that meeting or encounter is also disappointed as well. Like, we had to come together for whatever reason, but nobody has really got what they want. And this Mars opposite Saturn aspect, for all of those technical reasons, probably feels a little bit like that, where we're doing things that are necessary, that are maybe meeting these larger, longer term criteria, but they're a little bit more effort than we expected in the short term. And maybe it's costing more time or energy or money. And we don't quite get exactly what we want out of that experience. So if we know that going in, we can kind of manage our expectations. We could build in a buffer that gives us more time. We could put off for a few days or a week or two things that are not as pressing as the one or two priorities that we've determined are pressing. And so that's where we can kind of try to work with Saturn's themes of contraction, reduction, delay, consciously and really intentionally. Like, there's this one thing that I know I need to do around August 8, which means everything else has to be done at least 3 days before, or it's not getting done for at least 3 days after. And that's where we get into the heart of an opposition aspect, where we're often in a situation where we have to make choices. And when we have Saturn in that opposition aspect, we have to make really necessary, practical choices. We're not choosing from the place of desire or, emotion. We're choosing from the place of that more matter of fact, dry, that's just simply not going to work. Doesn't mean we don't care or we're not interested. It just means it's not going to be possible. It's not practically doable. And so with that Mars opposite Saturn aspect, just be prepared for making those choices, which mean, look, we're not going to do that thing. We're not going to squeeze one more thing into the month. We're not going to squeeze one more thing into the summer or the winter, depending on where you are. And so, it's okay to say no if that's going to be the best answer for you. Under a Mars Saturn aspect like this, there's a lot of restructuring and a lot of reevaluating. One of the things I find really useful in a Saturn aspect that is technically challenging is this process of questioning our priorities and re-choosing commitments. And so choosing who or what duties really matter to you and then stepping away from everything else. We could look at a Mars Saturn opposition as a chance to reevaluate everything that's in our calendar. Saturn is a planet associated with time. So where is all my time going? And do I still agree with that? Now, at a more personal level, there are some ways that you can get really specific about the topics in your chart and life that this Mars opposite Saturn aspect might be kicking up that need for reevaluating and structuring, or highlighting the need to slow down and delay or push some things away. So the first and most obvious place are the topics of the Aries and Libra houses. And so if Aries is on the third house in your chart and Libra is on the ninth house, it's those third and ninth house topics, maybe travel, education, learning, maybe something to do with siblings, something to do with philosophy or religion, and making choices between different topics or possibilities around those particular topics. Maybe Libra is second house of money, cash flow, and income for you, and Aries is eighth house to do with taxes, with debt, with financial loans and obligations or shared money. And maybe you're really having to nut into some of your financial choices, and the restructuring is happening around money and spending and budgeting and saving for you. So just think about the topics of the Aries and Libra houses in your chart. Could be 511, could be 410, just based on whatever your rising sign is and where Aries and Libra fall in your chart. That's the first and most obvious place. To take it a little further, you could think about the houses in the chart that are ruled by the planets in this aspect. So that would be the houses in the chart ruled by Mars, which traditionally speaking would be the house that has Aries on the cusp and the house that has Scorpio on the cusp. They're both signs traditionally ruled by Mars. And you could also look at the houses ruled by Saturn, and they would be the signs that have the houses that have Saturn signs on the cusp. So the house where you have Capricorn and the house where you have Aquarius, which is traditionally ruled by Saturn as well. And there are areas in your chart and life where you may be having to make tough choices, you're having to adjust timelines, you're having to maybe be the voice of reason, or you're having to give up a little of something that you want right now to attend to a pressing or more substantive obligation. So ultimately, in a Mars opposite Saturn aspect, yes, technically it's got a lot of criteria that makes this a challenging aspect. So it's easy to pick it as, the worst aspect in the month of August. And so what we want to think about is slowing down, taking more time, not, where possible, not doing any more than is absolutely necessary for our continued kind of survival. And so that is important as we head into that period around August 8th. But of course, it's not the only aspect. And, there's lots of aspects happening throughout August. These are just two of them. A few days after that more challenging, frustrating, kind of delay-filled Mars opposite Saturn energy, we have the good stuff arriving. We have that Venus conjunct Jupiter aspect. So just to get those practical details out of the way, Venus will conjunct Jupiter at 14 Cancer, and this is happening on Tuesday, August 12th. Now, Venus, as a quicker moving planet, does make a conjunction with Jupiter once every 12 months. So once a year, we get this. Typically, we get one Venus conjunct Jupiter aspect in each zodiac sign. So last year it was in Gemini. This year it's in Cancer. Next year it'll be in Leo, and so on and so forth. But it's not always that we have the Venus-Jupiter conjunction when it's in a sign where Jupiter is in such great condition. So if we use that same technical criteria that we use to assess that more challenging Mars-Saturn aspect, here we have an aspect involving the benefic planets, Venus and Jupiter. And again, it's easy to think of benefic as good, but there's so much more to benefic planets than that. We might talk about them as moderating or moderate planets in the same way that we talk about Mars and Saturn as planets that are extreme. And that's some of the key defining criteria between what is considered benefic and what is considered more malefic. So the more malefic placements and planets have those indications of extremes. And the more benefic or helping planets have those indications of moderation or moderateness. And the other piece of, Mars and Saturn as malefics is they tend to disrupt, delay, or deny things. Whereas benefics, as a contrasting piece, Venus and Jupiter are more planets that are more inclined to affirm or to encourage or to support. And so we go from, all this having to say no, restructure, delay, Mars, Saturn, and it's really just a few days later, we have this very affirming, very unifying, very collaborative aspect with Venus conjunct Jupiter. Now, I mentioned that Jupiter is in such great condition. Jupiter is technically exalted in the sign of Cancer. So Jupiter is in a great place to do, quite good quality Jupiter things, which can be about offering generosity, providing support, encouragement. We talk about Jupiter and abundance. And so people often go straight to financial or monetary abundance, which is one version of the abundance that Jupiter can offer. Jupiter, can also offer a variety of other types of abundance with health and physical vitality, abundance of spirit in terms of feeling uplifted or optimistic or hopeful about what's to come or where you're going. It can be about feeling gratitude for what you already have and showing appreciation for the people or the good stuff that's already in your life. Jupiter can certainly enhance those ties and interpersonal dynamics, especially under a conjunction with Venus. So here we have this aspect, Venus conjunct Jupiter, where Jupiter is sort of conferring its affirming qualities onto a lot of things that Venus indicates. So this will definitely be helpful for collaborative discussions, coming together in all kinds of settings, finding agreement, you know, whereas Mars opposite Saturn is like going to a meeting you don't want to go to and leaving having gotten really nothing you wanted. Venus conjunct Jupiter is going to something that you really want to go to, expecting to have a reasonable time and actually having a great time, and leaving with something that you didn't have before you went to that encounter. And because Venus is conjunct Jupiter in Cancer, a sign ruled by the moon, this to me feels a lot about really expanding the emotions and the heart. So this might be deepening those social ties, making connections with people that feel very heartwarming or feel just very uplifting. Like that was a really fun night that we had with those people. You know, they're lovely. Let's do that again. And because there's sort of a shy quality to the sign of Cancer, this Venus conjunct Jupiter aspect really makes me think about deepening or enhancing existing connections that you have. So this is with your besties that you already know and love, with those colleagues that you might already have a good connection with, certainly with a loved one or a romantic partner or family members that you already have this quality of cherishing with. And maybe there's another experience or encounter that just really helps either further establish or deepen the existing ties. But it's like making those great memories together that months and years from now we'll look back on and go, yeah, that was so good. I'm so glad we did that. Remember that time when? And so it feels really heartwarming at the very least. So, if we think about what Venus conjunct Jupiter might be about, you could bring in a variety of positive adjectives here. It can indicate a mix of enjoyable and pleasant things, from joyful experiences, pleasure, leisure, and relaxation. You know, with Venus conjunct Jupiter, I find sometimes we expect too much. You know, it can be this beautiful feeling that is known to us, but not really public. For sure, some people will have very explicitly romantic celebrations like anniversaries or, you know, weddings or parties or what have you. And so there's that piece. But for many of us, it might just be this really sweet night of like a home cooked meal with some loved ones or taking a walk in your favorite park. Maybe it's making some food from scratch or relishing in nature and the outdoors. So don't discount the simple pleasures from this Venus Jupiter aspect. There is a lot about relaxation, leisure in here. Venus loves to have that ease and that flow. And of course, Venus also indicates art and beauty and culture. And so Jupiter is kind of conferring benefits on Venus. Venus, of course, is a planet that represents women and feminine themes and topics, you know, in society and in culture. So we may have some supports or some, you know, positive developments in that regard. From a personal level, Venus conjunct Jupiter is a lot about togetherness and affection. We talked about these generous, warm feelings and that idea of just being together, either with people or in places that feel safe and that give you that sense of belonging. Maybe they feel like home to you. Maybe it's something you're doing at your home, but even that sort of found family, you know, people that you really treasure. This is such a beautiful aspect for that. And because the Venus Jupiter aspect is only a few days after the Mars opposite Saturn aspect, what I think is going to happen here is, yeah, there may be some frustrations. You know, Mars moves into Libra on August 6th, early on the 7th, depending on where you are. And it's kind of within 48 hours of that sign change that Mars bumps into Saturn. So that could be a bumpy few days. But as soon as Mars starts to separate from Saturn, Venus is in the technical place of application to that strongest, you know, connection to Venus. So it really feels as though we go from one kind of vibe to another in just a few days. And so, even if things do seem kind of challenging or pressured or frustrating around that Mars opposite Saturn aspect, I would encourage you to keep an eye on who or what is a source of ease, encouragement, and support, because that little source of support, if you like, that you only have an inkling of around maybe by the 9th of August, it's going to grow and strengthen in the days as we get closer to August 12th. Now, when we think about the Venus conjunct Jupiter aspect, you can do similar things with this aspect as you would with the Mars Saturn aspect in terms of personalizing it for your own chart. And this might involve thinking about, okay, we know Venus is conjunct Jupiter in the sign of Cancer. What is the Cancer house in my personal chart? If you have Cancer on the 11th house, if you're a Virgo rising, for instance, in the whole sign format, Cancer is the 11th, then this might explicitly be about friendships and groups and community ties for you, because that Venus conjunct Jupiter aspect is happening in your 11th house. But maybe you have Cancer on the 4th house. Maybe you're an Aries rising chart and Cancer is 4th house of home and family. And this Venus conjunct Jupiter aspect is really supporting topics to do with your living situation, your home environment, and maybe even your family relationships. So thinking about the topics of the Cancer house in your personal chart may be a way to tap into where some of these benefits, maybe the blessings, the opportunities, that affirming, let's say yes, quality of Venus Jupiter is coming through for you. But similarly, you could also think about the topics of the houses that are ruled by Venus and Jupiter. And so Venus, of course, rules Taurus and Libra. And so the houses in your birth chart that have Taurus and Libra on the cusp will also get some of the flow-on benefit of this really juicy generative aspect. The Sagittarius and Pisces houses in your chart, which are the ones ruled by Jupiter, will also get some of this sweetness and this enjoyable energy kind of flowing on to those topics and those areas of life as well. Now, we talked about Mars Saturn being in opposition and having to make choices. That isn't really like ideal. Venus Jupiter is a conjunction, so it's a coming together. It's like a seed planting moment. It may be a time of initiation, like we are beginning this new path and we're doing it around the topics of our Cancer house or our Taurus house or our Libra house or our Pisces house or our Sagittarius house. We're beginning something new with a lot of support, with encouragement, and we're beginning something new that feels like it's growth oriented. We're ready for a new adventure. We're ready to gain new wisdom and understanding. We're ready to grow beyond what we already know. So with Venus conjunct Jupiter, we are looking for opportunities for growth. We're looking for experiences that might be a little new and different, but are going to allow us to expand our heart, expand our understanding. So we're taking what we already have and we're making it bigger, more meaningful, and more fulfilling as Venus comes to this conjunction with Jupiter. So that they're the two aspects. So if we think about like a little summary point here, we've got these two classical aspects of differing extremes happening right over that second weekend in August. Mars Saturn is heading into the weekend and Venus Jupiter is just a few days after that second weekend in August. And you might feel like life is swinging between different extremes, from the more challenging, effortful experience, around August 8th towards the more enjoyable, pleasant, kind of fun side of things as we get to August 12th. And you may notice that some areas of life feel kind of more heavy and hard. That Aries Libra part of your chart and life, maybe the Scorpio part, maybe the Capricorn Aquarius part. Those are the topics and parts of your chart and life that are more likely to have that effortful experience under this Mars Saturn aspect. And then we have other areas of our life that feel more open and uplifting and more like fun and enjoyable. And they're going to be maybe the Cancer part of your chart, the Taurus or Libra part, or even the Pisces and Sagittarius parts of your chart. And I wanted to kind of flesh all that out so that you understand the aspects and some of the keywords and concepts, but that you can also see that while while some areas of life might be a little more challenging, we have other areas of life that are kind of being lit up with these growth possibilities. And this is really important to understand, that just because we have a challenging aspect, it doesn't mean all of our life is affected by it. And when we have this really great aspect from a technical perspective, it is probably not blessing our entire life, but it is blessing parts of our life. And the reason for this is that, you would all know this from your experience, and I know this from my own lived experience. I also know this from my, very privileged place of being a consulting astrologer for over 20 years now, where people have these kind of highs and lows in their life at the same time. They can have amazing opportunities with joyful events and experiences going on, while at the same time dealing with some struggle. You might be dealing with a lot of challenge at work. Maybe you've been laid off. Maybe you've got a boss who's really, toxic and controlling. I don't know if I can stay here, but perhaps you and your partner are about to welcome a new baby into your life. And so it is, the sweet and the bitter. It's not uncommon to have both happening, in quick succession timeline wise. And so for all of us, I think there's a little bit of that experience around the second weekend in August. And so I guess to end on maybe a high note, which is, a beautiful Jupiter thing to do, anytime we have Jupiter in the mix, adopting that kind of attitude of gratitude about what is already good and safe and fun can really help you amplify the positive. And it's one of the reasons why I always like to talk about like the best and worst, the good and the bad, because there's often a contrast, and it's good to remember the good stuff as much as it is to be prepared and ready when things look more challenging. Now, I would love to hear how these experiences are showing up for you. If you feel comfortable, please let us know in the comments below what you're experiencing. All right, everyone, that is it for me with your highlights of the best and worst for August. I hope that was interesting for you. I'll be back to share more again next time. Until then, take care.